Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I think we're ready to start. We're really excited to present this information to you and have a discussion around what we're talking about with the Human Animal Support Services model. Tonight, we've got our executive team together to bring this all out and talk with you. And we'll introduce as we go through, as we pass the baton, we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Ellen Jefferson. I'm the executive director of Austin Pets Alive and American Pets Alive. And I'm excited to be on the executive team working on this really exciting project. So we're going to quickly run through some slides. So I'll start there. First thing is we're here from Pima Animal Center, Humane Rescue Alliance, Michelson Found Animals, and American Pets Alive. And again, we'll introduce ourselves as we walk through this. So back in the 1850s, animal sheltering was emerging, and the dog pound was created in an attempt to stop rabies from spreading across the country. And you can see how many dogs were picked up in a single week in a community in the 1800s. And the purpose of it was because, as everybody can relate to this coronavirus, rabies virus didn't have a cure and it didn't have a vaccine. And so having dogs were the main, and still are the main perpetrator of spreading the virus, rabies virus, to humans. And so dogs were rounded up and taken to a place where they could be held for 3 days to see if an owner might come for them or not, and then shot. And that is the beginning of our shelter system. And I think that's important because it's the foundation of everything that we do here forward. And I'm not saying we still do that. Obviously, we don't shoot dogs anymore, mostly in America. And we're in a place that's much different. But if that's our roots and that's our foundation, and I think it's important for us to take a second and look back at that, because it helps to understand the need for a transformation to take place towards the new. And one of the fundamental pieces that comes from taking a bunch of animals and moving them to one place for them to be held for a certain amount of time for somebody to come get them is that we're separating people from their homes. We're separating pets from their people, from their homes and their communities. And the entire movement has been based on that. No matter what sector of the movement we're in, no kill, socially conscious, working on making humane communities, spay neuter, everything is built around this old foundation. And it's pretty persistent. These kennels are kennels that were back in the early 1900s and still exist. And I think that Kristen said these were from Detroit. Is that right, Kristen? And, you know, I work in a shelter in Austin that is 70 years old, and the kennels are 70 years old. And so what we used back then is obsolete in many ways, but we're still using it for the same function of holding animals. And this picture over here is from PAC, probably from around the 50s as well, from Pima Animal Care Center. And so one thing to know about that is that when we're thinking about this transformation, it's not new. This is something that we have always done. This picture is from Washington, D.C., and it is, you can't probably read that, but basically it's an ambulance to pick up animals and to do community outreach. And I think that that is fascinating because we've always had this element where we're going into the community. It's just usually we're going in and taking the animals back to the shelter. And so we need to build on that piece of what we've always done. And what's changed since then is shelters are completely different in the way that they serve people in the shelter and animals in the shelter, but we're still doing it in the shelter. And so we've built community pet resource centers. We've done so much work with behavior work in the shelter, medical clinics in the shelter, and they have completely changed the way they look and feel, but the foundation still exists. So what hasn't changed? We're still operating on the premise that in order for pets to receive services, they have to be removed from their homes and communities and separated from their owners. And they have to be housed in this environment that is more like an institution than it is like a home. And that is really relevant for places like Texas, where shelters and what's called releasing agencies aren't allowed to even offer services to owned animals legally unless they own the pet themselves. So shelters are mandated to take the animals in if they want to provide services that an owner can't provide. So I think that's really, we're probably not the only state that has that problem. So now I'm going to, let's see. Sorry, one more slide for me. So modern sheltering is built on this institutionalization. We know that that is endemic to our field, and it's part of what we all cope with and we try to make better, every single one of us. And we know the shelter system is still built on separating pets from their families. And one of the biggest problems with that is that once they're taken away from their homes and their people and their neighborhoods, it's really hard to get them back. And it makes it even harder when you talk about these huge volumes that some shelters have that are taking from 9,000 square miles of a city into one location, or like in Austin's case, 900 square miles into one location. And it's really hard to get those animals back to where they belong. Most pets are still housed primarily in the confines of individual kennels in an institutional environment. And those, we already know this, we get medical problems like distemper outbreaks, diarrhea outbreaks, behavioral problems get compounded in the shelter because of the stress and the lack of consistency between handlers. We see that pet owners and finders aren't currently empowered to be part of the solution. And that's important because we need them to be part of the solution. But when the animals are removed from the community and those people aren't able to access those animals in the same way, then they're not as empowered as they would be if they were still together as a unit. And we know, especially in the South, we see that there is fear around the punishment of an animal having to go to a shelter or being picked up, or the citations. And in places where there's undocumented workers, that can be something that people have to choose between living here and getting their pet back. And so we have some really non-human friendly policies that are in place that we need to reevaluate, because it makes it hard for pets to get back to the community. And even the very best shelters struggle with long lengths of stay for the more challenging pets. And again, we see that we're trying to save a lot of dogs here in Austin, and we have length of stays that we believe are unacceptable, but we continue to work on them and get them down. Every year they go down, and we're working as hard as we can, but they continue to be a sore point in our system that is hard to fix with the current way that we operate. So now I'm going to pass the reins over to Lisa Lafontaine, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Jefferson. I'm Lisa Lafontaine. I am the president and CEO of the Humane Rescue Alliance, and we operate out of Washington, D.C. and Morris County, New Jersey. And I want to give a big shout out to all the HRA St. Hubert's people on the call. I miss you guys. Good to see all your names here. So we operate out of 6 different facilities in DC and New Jersey, and they run the gamut from a very traditional 75, 80-year-old pound facility in the nation's capital, all the way to a really beautiful new adoption community center up in Madison, New Jersey. And so we're used to operating out of a lot of different environments. And you know, I think when you're in the midst of your work, and especially when you work as hard as we all do, you're as dedicated as all of us, and you're just always every day getting up looking to do a better job. Sometimes you don't notice what's around you. And I'll never forget one day when I went to our New York Ave shelter, and I was at the front desk, and I noticed that everybody was just walking around this box, and everybody had these really complex patterns of walking around the box to do their work. And I realized, I said something like, what is that? Was that box really important? What's that about? And no one was seeing it. And it was because it was in their environment all the time. And so they were creating all these mechanisms to avoid it without even knowing it was there. And I think that is just a great metaphor for sometimes we don't see limitations that we live in the middle of all the time. And sometimes we make accommodations to things that don't fit and that get in our way just because we've been doing it day in and day out. And really, the shock of this pandemic experience has caused us all to jump out of almost all of our normal routines. And I think it's remarkable that as a movement together, so many of us responded in the exact same way as we saw the pandemic coming to our community. We all had an instinct that we had to get animals out of our shelters. We all put out pleas for adopters to come. We all asked for help with fosters. Many of us got overwhelmed because we had more fosters than we did animals. And in a very short period of time, from 3 to 10 days for most organizations, we had emptied out all our facilities. We had changed almost all of our operational practices and procedures, and we had invented some massive new ways of engaging with stakeholders, from virtual adoptions to telemedicine. And I just want to pause and have everybody think about what that means in terms of your resilience, in terms of the muscles that you've created, in terms of your capacity for innovation. I mean, all of us as a movement across the country turned on a dime. Most of us turned in the same direction, and our shelters were empty. And the other thing that we experienced is that for the most part, people were not giving up their animals due to the COVID virus, and more people are coming to foster. And I think that we've all begun to think about our work in a different way because we're doing things so very differently. We're supporting so many foster families. We are taking in animals in different ways. We have switched to appointment-based systems. We have very little face-to-face contact with our stakeholders. And I think that it has been so encouraging to see the way that we put the call out and we're overwhelmed by support. And I've been telling people that that's really a cause for celebration because our community has been with us. You know, they're there with us in good times, they're there with us in tough times, and they are our shelters right now. So the media has really picked up on this story. And I think that we've gotten a lot of attention from the outside world about the fact that adoption and foster is happening in such a powerful way, and it's been universal. And I think that one of the really important things is that this is a moment for us to make a choice. And the choice is, do we keep doing things the way that we have been, or do we choose a new path forward? And frankly, I don't think there is a choice. I don't think there ever will be a normal to go back to. I think that society is always going to be different. But I think also that we've now had the experience of engaging with a community in a different way, and they want to help us in a different way. And we need to lean into that. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight is a possible path forward. So I'd like to turn it over to Kristen Auerbach.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Hassen-Auerbach. I'm the director of Pima Animal Care Center in Tucson, Arizona. And I work at a shelter where we have an intake of about 19,000 pets a year in a community of fewer than 1 million people. And previously I worked in Texas where intakes were also very high. And so those of us who are involved in the executive committee are undoubtedly involved with shelters that are tremendously challenged, particularly with big dogs, adult cats, and kittens. And so not everyone on this call is as challenged with the volume of animals that we are, but as we walk you really briefly through the 10 components, they're rooted in serving shelters that are extremely challenged, but I also get to work with hundreds of shelters around the country every year, and no matter where they are, even if they aren't inundated with intake, they struggle mightily with medium and large dogs, with adult cats with medical conditions, and they struggle to move those animals through the system. And they also still struggle to return pets, lost pets home. So we think that these are for everyone, but these are just our first 10 ideas. So as you're hearing them, please keep in mind, what are we missing? Before we move into this, we have a poll question for you. So we can go ahead and launch that first poll question, Rory. we're curious who's here tonight. It's really exciting that there are more than 350 people on right now watching, but we want to know, who are you and what is your role in the organization? So let us know roughly what category you fit in your organization so that we have some idea of who you are. Great, and we'll wait till about, okay, so of those of you who voted, 43% are leadership, 26% management, 11% coordinators, 12% volunteers, awesome, welcome volunteers, 2% fosters, great, and 6% public advocates, that's amazing. Welcome everybody. So we're gonna walk you through the 10 really quick and give you an idea about what the heck we're talking about when we say human animal support services. So the first, number one, is that the shelter provides emergency medical care and short-term housing for pets with urgent needs. And what this means is that the pets that are coming into the shelter, that are actually coming into the institution, are pets that really need to be there. They may be dogs that were unsafe in the community and for a public safety reason needed to come immediately into the organization. Or this was a kitty that had been hit by a car and needed to come into the organization to get immediate care. Tiny puppies and kittens that might need care at the shelter. So the shelter doesn't go away. A few years ago, we were all in meetings talking about, is there a future without shelters? There's probably not a future without crisis support centers for pets. Number two, the public can reach the organization quickly and easily using remote technologies like text, phone, and web chats. So we had to pivot immediately during COVID. I remember in the first couple of weeks, as we were meeting with hundreds of other shelters, we were talking about, do we all close or do we stay open? And nationally, we mostly made the choice to stay open with modified operations, but we had to start using new kinds of technologies. And the picture here is a dog who was adopted from our shelter by remote, by a Zoom counseling session. All the counseling was done remotely, and then our volunteer went and dropped that animal off. And that meant that that person who was in a more vulnerable group didn't have to come to the shelter to do the counseling, and the volunteer brought the pet to them. In this new system, volunteers are engaged in every area of the organization, including field and outreach services. So when we work with shelters all over the country, most people have volunteer programs, but they don't have the robust volunteer programs they could, where volunteers are part of everything the organization does. One example would be auxiliary animal control or animal protection units. Outreach volunteers, these volunteers, they're actually stuffing bags full of food and they distribute them at 4 homeless outreach events a week. And so in this system, volunteers are really considered unpaid shelter personnel and have an even deeper, more ingrained role in the organization than in most cases they do now. And yes, there are shelters that are doing this already, but they are few and far between. Number 4, telehealth services are available for animal caregivers considering surrender, foster caregivers, and people who find animals that might be sick or injured and need to know, does this animal need immediate care? This is an example at a shelter where a foster appointment, the animal had some lameness issues, and so the foster appointment's actually happening through telehealth, and the veterinarian's able to watch that happen and make a decision about what needs to happen with the pets based on what they're seeing through telehealth. Number 5, animals that physically enter the shelter have outcome pathways defined before or at the time of intake, so the in-shelter length of stay is dramatically reduced. We are working to build a system where pets can have these outcome pathways identified prior to coming in. And so, for instance, when counseling is done remotely, and remember, if we go back to number 1, when most of the intake counseling is done remotely prior to intake, except in true emergencies, then those outcome pathways can begin to be pursued before the animal ever comes into the organization. And so at organizations that are already doing this, and there are some, they're identifying rescue placement options for animals so that they're coming in, they're getting their vaccines, they're going straight to rescue, or they're identifying foster homes for pets. And what this does is it dramatically reduces the length of stay. And for many shelters, this could allow for pets that are on stray hold that they can leave as soon as the stray hold is over because the outcome has already been identified. So number 6, the vast majority of pets are housed in foster homes rather than shelter kennels, and most foster pets are adopted directly from their foster homes. This is a graph from our shelter. We decided to go all in on foster a few years ago, and as you can see, we were able to visibly see the correlation between life-saving and fostering, and our organization sends 5,500 animals a year to foster in a community with a relatively small base. We only have in our urban center about 600,000 people. And so if you imagine, if we can do it here in this little town, what other shelters can do. And indeed, shelters all over the country are proving that sending 3,000 to 5,000 pets annually to foster homes is completely possible. We look to Kansas City and other cities where they're sending a huge number of pets to foster homes already. And what this does is it allows the shelter to keep the animals in the shelter that really need to be there. There are dogs that will need behavioral rehabilitation. I saw a question popped up about victims of cruelty and neglect that might need to stay in the shelter longer, but it allows the staff in the shelter to focus more time, energy, and resources on those pets while housing most pets in foster homes. 7, animal caregivers can access pet support services, including housing, medical, and behavioral support, as well as food and supplies to keep the human-animal family together. And a lot of us are already doing this. We have pet support centers, we have pet support services, but we're just beginning to delve into the reasons that people have to give up their pets. In most of our shelter software systems, you see 5 or 6 reasons, like housing or medical, but we haven't really dug in and understood why people are having to give up their pets, and then begin to develop programs to address those reasons. We have a tennis shoe program, and so that dog is a beneficiary of our tennis shoe program. It's really important here in Pima County where it's very hot. Number 8, animal services personnel operate as trained case managers, helping people keep their pets, providing resources and support to struggling pet owners, and assisting owners who need to rehome their animals. So this is different than an intake counselor. Pet support case manager actually delves into the reasons why someone might need to give up their pet, maybe helps them rehome their pets, and helps get stray dogs home. So it's a little bit different than the transactional model a lot of shelters still use. And 2 more. Number 9, the organization operates a comprehensive lost pet reunification system to send most roaming pets home without them having to enter the shelter system. And many of us are starting to collect data on this because we're finding that when people get, when finders of strays get them home themselves, more than not, they're getting them home within a day of finding them. And they're finding that the animal that they returned was really just a few houses or a few blocks away. And we're just beginning to collect data on this, but the more we learn, we know that in this study, which came out of Austin, the preliminary data showed that 50% of finders were able to get the lost pet home, and that's much higher than most of our return rates. And lastly, human social service agencies, rescue groups, and other community partners work closely with the Animal Services Organization, also recognizing people in pets as a family unit. Dr. Jefferson and Lisa both said it, but it bears repeating that most of our services depend on separating animals from their person, from their home, from their community. Most pets can't receive services until that separation has happened. And so this model tries to serve those pets in any case possible without that separation occurring. And so this means providing services for pets and people and working in partnership with agencies that are already helping vulnerable populations. We know with COVID, a lot more people are going to struggle financially. And so number 10 is going to become a really important piece of how we move forward. So success for every community is going to look different. And we've talked to a lot of people already. Our executive team has probably talked to about 500 people about this project so far. And we know that each community is unique and each community is really different. But some of the success measures that we might imagine could happen, and some that we're looking at in our organization, are that we could see a 50% reduction of pets entering the shelter. The new shelter animals count data just came out for April, and it showed that there was actually a 50% national reduction in pets entering shelters. So it is possible, and now we know it's possible. Intake to placement teams mean that most pets can be placed within hours or days of entry, shortening the length of stay. I don't think any of us ever want to see another dog or cat in our shelters for 6 months, 8 months, or even longer in some cases, just because there's a lot of animals to choose from, and that one got overlooked. It could look like a reduction of in-shelter capacity by 50% or more at any given time, as most pets are housed in fosters, and fosters get those pets adopted directly from foster. And one of the other success measures is a reduction in customer service complaints, improved staff morale, and better service to our community. When we talk about things like managed intake, sometimes it feels like the movement is taking things away from people. But this is really adding services, using modern technology, and getting us up to date with the rest of the world when it comes to serving the public. You know, when you want to talk to the phone company, you can text them, you can text chat them and get a live response. These things are possible within animal welfare as well. And lastly, there are lots of concerns expressed about will life-saving go down because of COVID. This system, because it keeps many pets out of the shelter system, is capable of maintaining or improving life-saving in the shelter itself and improving those outcomes. So having said all of that, I will turn it over to Gina Knepp to talk about the next part of this.
Oops. Sorry, I turned myself off. Hello, everybody. My name is Gina Knepp. I'm with the Michelson Found Animals Foundation. I'm going to tell you what's happening now, but I can't do it with my face showing because I distract myself. So bye. A lot of things are happening right now. It feels like everything is happening all the time, 7 days a week. It's like being on a bullet train headed to the happiest place on earth for animals in America. I cannot tell you how much work is happening behind the scenes, and literally hundreds of people are involved in this process. We have some of the brightest minds in the industry working on this project. It's literally mind-blowing to me anyway, and hopefully all of you are curious and excited about the possibilities for our future. We have identified the Tier 1 pilot cities. There's 13 of them listed, as you can see here on the slide. They have signed up and have begun to work very hard on leading the way for the rest of us. Can I get the next slide, please? Here are the Tier 2 communities that have applied for participation. And it's really an exciting swath of America and a list that we anticipate will grow as we progress. And I know there are some of you in this audience that are thinking, how do I join? And we will tell you, but we absolutely are ready, willing, and able to welcome as many other cities as possible to get on this bullet train of ours. We are powered by, I love that word, some very strong names in the industry that have been generous with funding. So Maddie's, South Fork Pedigree, Michelson, and Humane Rescue have all made an investment in this project, and we can't do it without continued support. That guy on the right, in case you don't know, that's Bobby Mann, and he's gonna be talking in a minute. But that level of energy and enthusiasm that you see in that picture, he's 24/7 that way. So if you decide to get on this train, you will absolutely be working with Bobby, and he is contagious. But we are, again, this project is hugely dependent upon additional investors that are eager to support this program and see what we can do as an industry. I mean, to me, I've been in the industry for a decade, and this is the most exciting thing that I've seen come out of it. It's kind of sad that it took a pandemic, but it did. I think I can turn it over to Bobby. If anybody is interested in having a discussion about an investment, you can contact any of the executive team and we'll put you in touch. We'll talk to you obviously, but we'll put you in touch with the person who's who's wrangling that piece of the project. But if you can't invest, please think of those that can. We're happy to take suggestions. Bobby, are you ready to wrangle this show? It's like a
I
party.
am.
There's 355 people at a party.
Well, thank you, Gina. I appreciate the intro, and how incredibly embarrassing is that photo. I feel like I invited 355 of my friends over to my house, and my parents started pulling out that kids album. Yeah. So that picture is actually from the future. That's actually when this social distancing is ending, and that's what my face is going to look like, because I miss seeing all of you. But no, I'm incredibly honored to be a part of this program and pilot. My name is Bobby Mann. I'm now with American Pets Alive. I'm currently transitioning, or just transitioned over from the city of Sacramento's Front Street Animal Shelter. Had a lot of my career there. I've been working in the animal welfare industry for about 12 years, so pretty much my whole adult life. Had an opportunity to work for traditional nonprofits, government shelters, and really have grown up through the process. I think what I want to start off with before getting into what the structure of this program is sort of my why. What would draw me to be attracted to having an opportunity like this. And growing up through the industry, one of the things very early on from working an intake counter, we were all in the business of trying to help as many animals as we could, but I often found my times trying to decide between providing service to a pet and separating a pet from its family. And for me, that was one of the most difficult parts of the job. I think as I grew through the industry, I really did focus on the people because I think oftentimes that is so forgotten because we're so conscious of supporting all of these animals, giving our energy to them. And as I grew through the industry and was able to take on leadership roles, one of my primary focuses were the people. As a leader at local shelters, my conversation was always, I'm not in the business of caring for animals. I'm in the business of caring for people that care for animals, because they truly are the driver of change. And so through this, I found it incredibly attractive to see that it was really about supporting both ends of the leash, keeping families together, supporting our community, but also really lifting up our shelter staff and employees. When you think about what we do day to day, and as Lisa mentioned, that box that sits in the middle of our shelter, we all have it. We all have a stack of paper sitting somewhere, or a crate that's been sitting in the same spot. We're assuming somebody else is going to take it for another pet that's going to foster. And we just go out business that way. We have been a very reactive industry because that's how we've known to do business. We've been busy filling holes. And this COVID response has really allowed us to slow down and understand what our goals and expectations should be. I think what I really love about a lot of these goals and concepts as well is this was built through a collective of shelter employees from around the country through the American Pets Alive Facebook page. I saw 5,000 people come together and they really said, we need to do business differently. And I will tell you, I'm the first to say that our industry hates other people telling us what to do. Well, guess what, people? We are telling ourselves what to do. We have created our own map, and I find that just amazing. So for me, it's incredibly exciting. My why is helping pets and people, and I'm also able to surround myself with industry leaders, including this executive team, working with a lot of thought leaders, these working groups I'll dive into a bit. It's just so fascinating how many people believe that whatever your life-saving strategy might be, the fundamentals of what we believe is that pets should be in homes, and we want to save as many as possible. So I think this aligns with all of that, regardless of what walk of life or sheltering that you came from. So that's what's really near and dear to my heart. Now, speaking of the infrastructure, because this is such a big project, and my job coming over was to really wrap my arms around it and to help build that infrastructure. So obviously, as Gina said, we have around 13 pilot cities. Those cities are directly implementing a lot of these strategies with the help of a lot of our working groups, as well as our executive team. So we're doing a really deep dive into their data. We're trying to figure out what's the best way to quantify that data to show success. And we're also doing a lot of other communication support, research support, marketing support, so many tiers, and I'm sure we'll share that working group list to be able to show you that. The tier 2 shelters are actually self-implementing shelters. So one of the things that we really wanted to do in our tier 1s, we focused highly on making sure it was a diverse group. Large shelters, small shelters, nonprofits with government contracts, municipal shelters, so everybody at the end of this would have some roadmap that they can look at and relate to. And then the pilot 2 shelters or tier 2 shelters are shelters that are going to self-implement. So at the end of this, we can also see through your own willpower how successful you can be. Working groups, there's over 26 working groups that are providing support. If you're interested in joining any of those working groups, I know Rory's going to be texting or messaging the application in the chat, but also you can text this number with the keyword Haas, and we'll be able to get you that information as soon as possible. And yes, Gina is right. This is a freight train. We are moving incredibly fast. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day, but I think Haas has been built in about 12. And so we're moving. So I'm incredibly humbled and excited to be a part of this project. Thanks to Maddie's, thanks to all the other investors that are really getting behind this idea. And this is for all of you. And so let's do this together and let's change the world.
Thank you, Bobby. We have so many great questions asked here, and we just want to say one more time, it's with a lot of gratitude that you're all here. And this is a huge endeavor, and it is easy to sort of think about all the reasons why this can't get done. And like Lisa said, it is sort of time to be brave and charge forward, but all your input and questions are really appreciated because they're important to ask now. And we also recognize that there's critical pieces missing. We're still working on the field services component as a member of the National Animal Control Association board. It's heavy on my mind how we fully engage animal protection and animal control in this endeavor. And so we want to hear from you about what may be missing as well. Another thing that has been mentioned is the morale of staff, volunteers, and how the public feels about these programs. And so those are all the pieces that are being worked on, but being part of these working groups is really what we need, because hard conversations and critical feedback are the only way that we move forward. But we are going to keep moving forward in the midst of all of that as well. So we want to turn to some questions now, but first we have a poll. I think we have a poll question for the group, and then we're going to turn to some questions that we have been receiving. So if we can go to that next poll question. Okay, so we're really curious, we know a little bit about who you are in your organization, but why did you come tonight? What made you come? For some of you, it's 8:30 at night. For others, it's 5:30. We're all tired with work right now. So tell us why you're here tonight. And we wait just a minute so that we can get about 50% of you responding, so that we have a good sampling of who and why people are here, and we can get some good information. Okay, so 38% are here because your shelter is participating. Awesome, we're so excited you're part of the team. 5% shelter might want to participate. 70% interested in implementing more parts of the program, and 39% are 108, just want more information. Thank you so much for sharing that. So now let's turn to some of the questions that we've received. We're going to start with some that we've gotten pretty frequently, and then we'll turn to the questions that you were asking in the chat box. So take it away, executive.
I'll take this question. No, not all shelters are bad. Shelters are wonderful. There are some bad ones, but where's the best place for an animal? It's certainly not in a shelter. And I think we can all agree with that. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary and it is indeed the best thing, but I think the majority of the time, an animal is better served in a private home or at home with the people that love them, if that's possible.
I'll take this one. So absolutely not. We are not at all saying that shelters should close, but I do think one thing I've thought a lot about is that for the most part, our system has grown up around having brick and mortar places in communities that people come to that are like a hub and spokes model where people have to come to us in order to get something. And that there may always be some element of that, but I know for our organization, we had been looking at a strategic plan that was driving us to be a full service community center. And that meant embedding out in the community in a different way. It meant really listening to people in a different way. It meant not developing processes that were convenient to us, but developing processes that were convenient to our stakeholders. And I think this pandemic fast-tracked us going to that point. So I would say the simplest way to explain it and how I look at it is that for us, up until now, the shelter has been the center of gravity, and we have built programs on top of the shelter system. And we are now reversing that order. And we're going to put the center of gravity into the community, and we're going to use our shelters to support what we're doing out in the community and what we learn from engagement with our stakeholders. So it's really about changing the center of gravity and changing the priority.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm going to read these questions for people who are there's a few folks just listening. So the next one is, aren't pets usually better off in the shelter than staying with their owners, or at least sometimes?
I can answer that one. I think that we often assume that if an animal is in crisis or a person is in crisis and they are having trouble taking care of their pet, that means they're not a good pet owner. And I think one thing that we've seen over the last probably 10 years is really a better understanding of what people are going through, and helping to see that that's not, our original assumptions are not necessarily the case. And so I think one of the key pieces of this whole program is that case management system, and understanding which pets, getting a good idea of actually which pets are in danger and which pets just need help to stay in the home that they're in. And if you think about, the scared old Chihuahua that comes into the shelter that's lived with somebody their whole life and all of a sudden is at a point where there's crisis, is it the best thing for them to come into the shelter? It might be, but probably there's a way that that pet could just spend the rest of their life with the person that they love already and not have to create a new bond. And so I think as we're going through this, we're going to learn a lot more information that we always wished we had data for. And hopefully now we will actually get data, because case management means we'd be able to actually document things in a better way and collect data around the things that we're seeing and the things that need to result in that separation of human and animal, and which things don't and can have a good outcome. So I'm really excited about the data that we can collect and really refine everything that we're doing. All the goals that we have as an industry typically revolve around sort of generic data, and we don't have the information we need to be really, really, really good at what we do. And so my hope is that we can get there with this.
Okay, the next question is, my organization depends on adoption fees. This is a big one. If you're an organization that depends on adoption fees, you might be thinking, well, how the heck am I supposed to generate revenue? So if I am one of those organizations, how will this impact me?
I'll take this one. I just hope I don't offend anybody. I'll try not to. If your organization depends on adoption fees for your livelihood, now would be a good time to think about what other ways you can generate revenue to stay relevant in your communities. We had an interesting conversation with a large animal welfare organization, and somebody on that call said it rather interestingly, that if that is all we're doing, then aren't we just animal traffickers? And I don't say that to offend anybody, but when she said it, it just struck me. It was so poignant. There are so many things that we can be doing to help animals and their people in our communities that will also raise revenue. I don't think adoption fees should be the only thing that would prevent us from implementing a model like this that will literally change animal welfare in the United States.
And I would add to that, Gina, that I think we have the opportunity to really think more globally about pets, and we know there's a huge demand from people to adopt animals, and we have a chance right now to really think about how do we how do we fill that void with animals that really need to find a new home, and focus on the ones that can't be helped in the communities around us? And so in Texas, we're surrounded by animals that need help, and Mexico's not very far away. I'm not suggesting that we all start importing animals from everywhere, but I think that we really need to think about how do we get our arms around where the true need is in our country, and how do we start filling the gaps of the supply question in the rest of the country. And I don't think adoption fees are going to go down. We know that 1 million pets die every year. So we know that there's a need for those animals to find some place to land to get adopted. And I think it's just a matter of trying to understand everything and then put it all back together in a way that makes sense.
I just want to add one thing about revenue, because we're all going to need revenue to make the changes that we need to make to move forward with this model. And certainly what we found at my organization is that if we tell the story differently, if we change the narrative, we bring in new funders. And for us, when we started really expanding our community safety net medicine programs, we just had to take some videos and tell the story of people who thought they were coming in to give up their pet. But then we said, no, we can fix this. We took them into our medical center. We gave them the treatment that we would have given them if they had been surrendered to us. And instead we handed them back to their owner, who then started crying and couldn't believe the generosity of what we were doing. And when we told donors those stories, they wanted to be a part of that. They felt like heroes being a part of keeping that love and keeping that bond. So I think it's just about considering what's the story we're telling, how do we engage with funders, and how do we really let them in? Because we're going to need them to be a part of this transformation as well. And I think that they're going to join with open, loving arms.
Yeah, and I would love to also chime in and just make this a complete collab answer on this. So yes, I think everybody had a really good point. I think it's also so important. It's also so important that these questions are asked, because one of the things as an executive team that we absolutely want to set the foundation of, this program, our concepts do not belong to us. We are facilitators of these concepts. We are here taking all of the information that you're providing us and trying to help guide paths to successful outcomes. So when you ask questions like this, it's not just about what are you going to do? It's how do we help you figure it out? And I think that's the beauty of the working groups and the pilot shelters. The goals are the same, but the paths are going to be very different. And so the more you're able to ask tough questions or questions that you might be insecure asking, please ask, because we want to be inclusive. We want to be able to represent our industry as a whole. And this is just going to make the project a better project.
Thanks, you guys. That was a really great collab answer. So since we're on a tough subject, I just want to cover one more tough subject that may or may not be in these questions. But is this about turning our backs on animals by keeping them out? I mean, I know managed intake's gotten some flack for just saying, keep it in the community. What would you say to people that are like, you're going to turn away animals, you're going to turn away victims of cruelty and neglect, you're going to turn away dangerous dogs, and it's going to be a crisis in the community?
So I would actually say to people the same thing I said when people were upset that we eliminated home visits on adoptions at my organization. And that is that, first of all, we can't look at this as a zero-sum game in terms of energy. But second of all, when we were doing home visits, we were using up a lot of bandwidth of staff and volunteers. And my question at the time was, if we have all this time to go check out people's homes to see if they're good enough, can't we use that time we had to go into their homes after the adoption to make sure that it's a success? And that's what I would say here. We're not turning our back on animals. We're changing the way we engage with the system. And so if we're not constantly drinking out of a fire hose by having to shelter huge numbers of animals and can really pay attention to the ones who need sheltering, we're going to have additional bandwidth to go out into the community and to help animals who are already living with people who love them, and to help those people who love them keep them.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think that the goal is that we provide better service to those animals. I know working in our shelter, we're so inundated with animals that we can't provide the best cares to the ones that really need us. And by keeping our shelters at 50% capacity, we're actually in a much better position to give all the love and care and attention to those animals that need us the most, the medical cases and the dogs with behavioral challenges. We haven't talked specifically about that, but it doesn't matter what shelter you're in right now, you are dealing with dogs with behavioral challenges, and they're primarily due to the stress of confinement. And so this program will allow shelters to better serve those dogs as well, is our belief, and to get the animals that really need to be in the shelter in, care for them and get them out quickly.
And Kristen, I realized I didn't address the part of your question about the dangerous dogs and public safety. And I mean, we have 18 animal control contracts at my organization, and we're responsible for public safety in the nation's capital. And so the thing that I absolutely know is we will always continue to protect the public from dangerous dogs. But what we're looking at, actually, we're building a new facility, and we're looking at building much nicer quarters for the dangerous dogs, because we know they're going to be with us for a long time. And so by not having all of the animals in the shelter, we can actually build nicer shelter for those animals that we can't handle as easily and who are going to be with us for a long time. And it's a more humane, compassionate standard of care.
Yeah, and Kristen, just to add to that, I think what I would love to encourage a lot, because I see there's such a large amount of leadership in this room or in this webinar. I think one of my favorite parts when we had to close down at Front Street and really examine how we were doing business is we allowed staff to be innovative in their thoughts and figure out if you could be as dynamic as you can be as an employee, and you could do more than just try to get through your day, come to the shelter, medicate the animals, clean up after them, feed them, get a couple adoptions done, and do it all over again, work 10, 11 hours, go home, do it again. If you had 6 additional hours a day to be the powerhouse that you want to be to support the pets in your community, what would you do? And I encourage you to do that over a Zoom call because you will see your staff's faces light up because it really provides them hope. It really empowers people, and it's going to show you that people are invested in this concept. People want to do more. People want to untuck their capes. And I think this is an opportunity for us to allow all of our staff to be the superheroes they are.
Gina, if we could ask you the next question, because I feel like in hearing you talk, people telling you can't do something is like daring you to do it. And so one of the things that we keep hearing is that keeping this many pets in foster just isn't possible, and that when people go back to work, they're all coming back and we're going to be right back where we started. What would your response to that be?
Well, I would say, I work for microchip companies, so I would say bullchip to that. I think it's late. I'm tired. I think, wasn't it Austin Animal Care that actually called all of the people that have pets in foster? It was Dawn Bland who told us this. They actually called and solicited from their hundreds of fosters what the intention was with the animal. And the overwhelming majority said either they were going to adopt or no, I'm going to keep fostering until this animal finds a home. I think we have to trust people. People are good. Most people are good, not bad. Thank goodness, right? Or we'd have all of our shelters filled with nothing but cruelty cases. And we know that's not the case. I don't know. I think it's a time for us to hold hands with our community. They want to help us. Clearly, there's waiting lists at every single shelter. So even if those animals, some of them do come back, there's a long list of other people that are sitting in the wings waiting.
Yeah, and Kristen, I'd like to add to that too. I think, yes, a lot of us were able to create these catalogs of potential fosters that wanted to provide support. I mean, for the first time since I've been working in the industry, I would never had an opportunity to say, oh my gosh, we have so many fosters but not enough animals. So that was a beautiful thing. And so I think people still have, quite a pull to pull from. But the other thing that you have to think about is when you're reducing the amount of animals that you have to care for, you're empowering your staff to provide better customer service. And the better quality service you provide to these fosters, the more receptive they're going to be to not only coming back and supporting you, but telling their friends, right? So I think that we have such a great foundation to start from. And then the only way that we're going to lose that momentum is if we don't provide the service that our community deserves. And I know using technology and the great people that we have, we can absolutely sustain that.
You know, I had another thought, Bobby. Fosters are volunteers. Oftentimes we delineate them differently, but they're not. They're providing a service to our organizations free of charge. And I don't know about your organizations, but I always say our at Front Street because I'm not there anymore, but it'll always be our. Volunteers were the biggest donors. They're our biggest champions in the community, right? So the relationship that we have with these foster families, we're cultivating an entire community of people that will come to our aid. And I bet you they'll write a check when we need help. Those are, you know, unintended positive consequences that come from good relationships now.
We have a million questions from people, and we're definitely not getting to all of them tonight because we are just about out of time. So a couple of people asked questions about the metrics that we shared. And those are really sample metrics. Those are the metrics our organization is using based on our, we carry a volume of anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 animals in our custody at any time. So a 50% capacity makes sense for us. But these are going to vary somewhat based on community. I don't know that we will ever come up with a number as entrenched as 90%, nor if that would be a goal of this. I think if we've learned one thing from the last 2 decades, it's that communities do vary somewhat and that the challenges are a little bit different, particularly when it comes to intake and volume of animals being housed. That's why these pilot communities are so important, is the diversity in the pilots is intended as a sampling to look at what do different sizes, types, poverty levels, how do all of those sort of impact this. Before we close, we want to go to each of the executive team members. We're going to answer your questions in writing and get you an email out in the next 48 to 72 hours. And we're going to also there will also be ample other opportunities to continue this conversation. But before we go, can I ask each of our panelists, is there a question you see that you want to answer, or some parting words you want to leave our now 350 attendees with?
Well, I see there's just so many great questions, and I'm glad that we're going to get an opportunity to answer them all. But one just struck me was, how can smaller organizations best step in and help larger organizations through this shift in philosophy and structure? What a great question. The whole notion of stepping in and helping. And I think that's probably going to be the key to success in this program across the nation, is when we actually start helping one another. I don't know that that's the appropriate answer, but it sure is an answer that resonates with me. Let the helpers help. And I guess to those larger organizations, accepting the help, setting off. We have big egos in this business, I know I do, but it's time for us to set that aside and accept the help and seek the help. So thank you all for being here. I appreciate it very much. I'm excited to be part of this program, and stay tuned for all the answers. A lot of great questions.
And I would add to what Gina just said, only by saying that a lot of the questions are questions we have. And we are trying to work through by creating these working groups and inviting people with the best brains out there to get together and brainstorm and come up with solutions. There's working groups on fundraising. There's working groups on trying to figure out how does a nonprofit without a government contract fit into this and help make it happen in a community with or without a willing government partner. I think that all of this needs serious vetting. We're not going to have all the answers, just the 5 of us. So we want people to come to the table and work through these really difficult issues so that we can get to the best product possible at the end.
I'd like to answer a question that my friend Sharon Harmon asked at the very beginning of the presentation, because it's something that's very close to my heart. And what she asked was, I'm wondering where justice for abused and neglected animals fits in to this model. 200 to 500 animal cases a year. Where are these services provided? And I'm with an organization that is turning 150 this year. And we were founded to protect the animals of the District of Columbia from cruelty and neglect. It will always be a key forward part of our mission. And we will always be a shelter to help support those animals. But I can say that we've started to really look at that population of animals from law enforcement cases and ask what is best for each individual animal. And a very large majority of them now are in foster homes, which was unthinkable to us 2 years ago, but we're finding that certain ones of them really thrive there, that these trusted fosters take excellent care of them, and that they actually go on to have happier lives because they were in foster homes. And so I think it's about just asking what's best for every single animal. And I would just want to close by saying I am hugely inspired and proud to be a part of this. But I think we're not going to be doing this in a way where we're going to be telling people what to do, because every community is different, every geography, every organization has different resources. And to some extent, we'll need to all find our own way. But I think the way that we find our own way is to link arms and do that together. And to me, that's the most important concept underlying all of this.
It's 6:01 and there's still 333 people listening to us. So I would say that this is pretty lit. I just feel so honored and humbled to be a part of this. I think for so long, we as an industry have been connected in our problems, but disconnected in our solutions. And for once, we are coming together to resolve this as an industry. And I just encourage you to please reach out. This is just the first of many conversations. We're just getting started, and be a part of the solution. So thank you all. I'm so humbled. Thanks to Maddie's and thanks to the executive team.
Thanks everyone for joining us. You can find out more information and meet regularly every Monday morning, the American Pets Alive Shelter and Rescue Support Facebook group. We're discussing all of this on a daily basis, and we're meeting every Monday. For leadership level staff, we meet every Friday as part of the COVID calls. And that is the Animal Shelter Leadership Coronavirus Facebook page. If you are a leadership level staff member, we meet every Friday, and while we're talking specifically about coronavirus, we're really talking about the future and how we're going to operate in this new world post-COVID. So both of those calls happen weekly, and we're discussing all of this there with this group, and we'll continue to have these conversations. You'll be hearing from us within the next 48 to 72 hours. We'll get all of your questions answered, and we're so grateful to have you, and thanks to Maddie's for all your support, and to all of our powering organizations who are helping make this possible. We appreciate you, and we appreciate everybody who came tonight. Have a great night, everybody.